So, in my free time, I like to watch Super Smash Bros. Gameplay, and I'm not good at playing the game by any stretch of the imagination. I'm actually really bad at the game, but I do enjoy watching it. And it is another competitive game, and so there's going to be some correlations you can draw between Smash Bros. And Pokemon. One of the things I want to talk about today in our discussion is this concept of an honest or dishonest player that's often bandied about in the Smash community. So I pulled up a couple posts on the internet of just random people discussing honest players, dishonest players, and by players I mean characters, and what makes them honest or dishonest. And I want to discuss how the way they describe those characters as being honest or dishonest, and compare that to some characters in Pokemon and their role in the metagame, and how that might be viewed as honest or dishonest. And this isn't necessarily to say that those Pokemon are or are not dishonest or honest characters. I'm not actually going to ascribe those labels as such. However, they are ones that I picked out for reasons, so maybe I feel that way about them to some extent. But I'm not necessarily saying, oh, I hate this character. It's just I feel like they represent things that are going to be listed in these posts. So in this first post, this person argues that an honest character needs to be perceived as being fair, and he breaks up this fairness into 4 categories. The first category is the risk-reward balance. If I can click a move that has very low risk but is going to give me lots of benefit in return, then that's that can be perceived as being cheap. And this, I think, will apply more to specific moves and less to specific characters, but there are a couple of characters that maybe you can make that argument about, and we'll come back to these posts when we actually talk about the specific Pokemon. The second thing that might change how you perceive a fairness for a character is things that are perceived as being cheesy, things that can kill you at early percentages, or just one-shot you, or maybe lead into modes that are disadvantageous for your opponent. I'm thinking maybe Volt Turn could be an option there, but like I said, we'll get to that when we get to it. The third one is what they label as degeneracy, but really what all that means is that either it means that I have to play in a style that's not fun to play or that's non-standard. And I think that this is a very important point, a bullet point that we'll have to return to multiple times when we talk about certain mons. Finally, the last option is things that are quote-unquote nearly unbeatable. And as opposed to how Smogon tiers their Pokemon, Smash Bros. Has generally been quite loath in the past to ban any characters, even with Bayonetta, or maybe with the Meta Knight, that's his name, Meta Knight, in Brawl. They never banned them, even though people were crying to get them banned. And so Smash definitely has a bigger problem with the quote-unquote unbeatable options. But even while a quote-unquote unbeatable option persists in the LU metagame, that is still something that people are going to view as being a cheap option. Oh, you just loaded up this really cheap Magirna set, and now you're going to sweep me with the Iron Defense, Calm Mind, Draining Kiss set. Well, how creative was that? That's really cheesy. But then we ban it, and then it is not a problem anymore, which is one difference between Showdown or Smogon and Smash Bros. Okay, the second post I want to talk about is somewhat similar, but they go into maybe more specific examples for Smash Bros. They talk about Pit and Lucina. Those are the two that I always hear get dragged out as examples of quote-unquote honest players. They don't have anything, and I like what they say here, they don't have anything uniquely meta or matchup defining. And I think that's a really important point, this idea that this character isn't going to make me deviate too far away from the meta to account for it. If there's already checks existing in the metagame for this particular character, then it's a lot less of a problem to account for it, and so I'm not going to view it as being particularly cheesy. I'll be like, okay, I get what this character does, I already have things that can deal with it, and so it doesn't feel dishonest when my opponent uses it. But if my opponent uses something that the current metagame doesn't really have many options for, then I'm going to feel like they're trying to exploit me somehow, right? They're trying to just say, oh, you don't have any answers for this character. And some might view that as good team building, right? Looking at the metagame, saying, hey, there's this opening that I can exploit, now I'm going to go get a bunch of free ones in the ladder. And so unless there's anything wrong with that, but at the same time, especially if they're a particularly strong Pokemon or the set is particularly powerful, then maybe people would view that as being cheap. On the other hand, they say that if a game plan revolves disproportionately around one facet of play, that's something that is viewed as being dishonest, right? And then they give some examples of what would be more dishonest. And I think that's also a really crucial point to consider. Is this character defined primarily by one button that they click every single time? And if that's what it is, then people are going to view that as being more cheesy. And I'll get into some examples here in a second. So overall, I think those are pretty decent posts describing what is honest or dishonest when it comes to Smash Bros. Now I want to see how we can compare that to Pokemon. Okay, so here we are with some mons that I've put into just a random team, and they're going to represent some of the cheesier aspects of Pokemon. The first character up on the roster is Barraskewda, and I don't necessarily want to single out Barraskewda, so I've nicknamed it as Rain. And I think Rain in general is the cheesy play style that I want to consider. If we consider normal speed tiers in Pokemon, I can account for certain choice scarf threats like Kartana or Tapu Lele, and if that causes my team a specific problem, maybe I'll run Ditto or whatever. And I can also run maybe Choice Guard Dragapult if I really need to go that far. But I don't necessarily have to worry about mons suddenly getting way faster than they used to be, and at the same time way harder hitting. But Rain does both of those things, right? Because so many water types have Swift Swim, Rain already doubles the power of water type moves. Suddenly these mons are getting twice as fast and twice as powerful. Well, of course, I can run a bulky water type. Slowbro is a really good example of a water type that's going to break down a lot of Rain teams. You know, unless they have something like Kritra or Kingdra that can just blow past your Slowbro. And maybe another random Ludicolo, I don't know. But generally Rain can be stopped by a couple of bulky mons, especially if one of them is a bulky water type. But I have to specifically account for that when I'm team building. Another option maybe is if I have an opposing weather. So there are ways to handle Rain. I'm not saying that it's this broken playstyle. Even in Gen 7 when you had Mega Swampert and other things tearing up the Rain and becoming super metagame defining. But then we also see things like Dracovish. When Dracovish came out, it didn't even have Swift Swim. But Fish's Rend in Rain was to a KOing Ferrothorn. That shouldn't be allowed. Of course, that got banned, and that's fine. But the fact that Rain allows this to occur, where I'm letting Pokemon just do double damage just because there's Rain up. And if I don't have something to stop that, either Water Absorb or the opposing weather, or maybe a mon that just is that bulky that it can take the hits and shrug them off, then all of a sudden I just load up my team into my opponent's team who has Rain, and I just automatically lose. And there's nothing I can do, and that can seem really cheesy. On a similar note, Trick Room is also often considered a very cheesy playstyle. It preys off of inexperience in the matchup, and if you don't know how to deal with the Hatterene and the Cresselia and the Porygon, then the Crawdaunt and the Marowak and the fill in the blank last mon, they're just going to run through your team. right? Stack Attacker, or whatever the heck they want to put in that last slot. If you don't know how to play against them, well, you're just going to lose now, sorry. If you do know how to play against them, then they can seem not as bad. And again, Trick Room hasn't been banned. It's not like it's Baton Pass levels of cheese. But that isn't to say that it doesn't fall under the cheesy category. If we go back to the post, we can see that this is a non-standard version of play. And I think that's one of the big problems, is that normal metagame revolves around normal speed tiers, where things are going at normal speeds. I can account for that. And as soon as I flip the script and make the slow bulky mons with high attack stats also capable of outspeeding everything, then we're going to have a problem. Now I want to talk more about individual Pokemon. The first Pokemon that I want to throw under the bus is Volcarona. Volcarona is often viewed as being this easy Pokemon to get wins with, and while that can be true in certain matchups, I don't actually think that is always true. Your opponent should usually have a bulky Spadef, tank, or wall. Landorus is often used to check Volcarona to some extent, plus you've got Priority Aqua Jet from a couple Mons, and you've got Toxic, you've got Blissey, you've got Unaware Clef, you've got all sorts of options to deal with Volcarona, and you only need one or two of them. And Volcarona also suffers from a serious 4-move slot syndrome, right? Are you going to run Giga Drain for Swampert? Are you going to run Psychic for Toxapex? Are you going to run a bug type move so you can have good stab on that side? Or are you going to forego that entirely? Are you going to run Roost so you have longevity? There's all sorts of options that you can run on Volcarona, and while oftentimes your opponent may have nothing for Volcarona, a lot of other times you can just do nothing with Volcarona. It's not even a good Pokemon. But because Volcarona really only relies on one strategy, that is Quiver Dance up, sweep the opponent in the endgame, then it really seems like it's just mindless. Right? I didn't have to think when I formulated my game plan. I just know my game plan is going to be this, and either you have something to stop me or you just lose. And that seems very dishonest. Toxapex is the next number up, and Toxapex is useful for checking a lot of mons. I think Toxapex a lot of times gets a really bad reputation because it can be used to be very stally, and especially if a metagame gets to the point where it's very grindy, where stall becomes very powerful, or even hard balance gets very powerful, then your opponent can get very frustrated when, a Toxapex, Corviknight, and maybe some other bulky mon, I don't know, Buzzwolf, can just make it so that it's almost impossible to break my opponent's team. And while you're trying to do any type of damage to these mons, they're just clicking Scald, they're clicking Toxic. And this is where I want to bring up that risk-reward balance. Move like Scald has very low risk. Scald is only going to maybe heal a Water Absorb mon if your opponent has one, and specifically in OU, a Water Absorb is not really used very much. So you're almost always going to be able to just easily click Scald on any of your opponents switching in, and you're going to get to have a 30% chance to burn. So it has high reward, it has very low risk to click, and similarly, specifically on Toxapex, Toxic is another one, or Toxic Spikes if that's the route you want to go, because it's poison type. Toxic can never miss, and Toxic is a very good move. It gets your opponent's status, and it can't stay for very long. And over the course of the game, if you can draw it out and change the pace of the game to be slower, then your opponent's just going to lose all their health, and that can be very demoralizing mentally. But also, it actually just does mean you're going to lose the game if you can't speed up the gameplay or have healed up. So that risk-reward balance, I think, is where a lot of the problem comes in Toxapex. Toxapex also has Knockoff, which is another high-reward, low-risk play, right? Not many justified Pokemon in OU, and Knockoff is going to get rid of my opponent's item almost 100% of the time, maybe 100% of the time in Gen 8, because there's no Z Crystals, no Mega Stones. And so Knockoff is a very useful move, and Toxapex can just spam all of these moves. Very low low risk moves. And so Toxapex isn't the only mon that does this, but I wanted to use it as sort of the representative of this idea. Toxapex has a lot of bulk that it can just sit and be fat, and in conjunction with other teammates that may be similarly annoying, that playstyle could be considered very dishonest because you're not actually putting forth a risk on your part, right? It's not like you have your Terrakion that has to risk clicking Stone Edge to sweep the game. No, you're just clicking this very safe move that has a 30% chance to burn, or you're clicking this very safe move that's going to whittle me down over the course of this very long, protracted game, and it had zero risk on your part. The next is Magnus Zone. The Magnus Zone is the last trapper in the game, at least the last automatic trapper. Of course, there's still Whirlpool, Odds, or whatever, but the last automatic trapper with Magnet Pull, and Shadow Tag and Arena Trap, of course, are gone. But Magnus Zone persists because it is quite useful against Ferrothorn and every once in a while Scizor. So that's fine. Of course, Magnus Zone lost Hidden Power Fire in this generation, but it got Body Press in exchange. And I don't know which one I like better. I still like Hidden Power Fire, probably just because then I can invest into my special attack and just have that be what it is. But Body Press is better, I suppose, against Ferrothorn on Rain. So there's that. In any case, the problem with Trapper Pokemon is that it puts your opponent in a disadvantage just by having it on your team. Because now I can't use my Corviknight or my Skarmory or my Ferrothorn as freely as I would like to, because on any given turn, you're liable to switch your Magnus Zone in, and then I've lost that Pokemon. And if I needed that Pokemon to stop your Dragonite, or I needed to stop your Haxorus, or whatever Pokemon that you may have in the back that's going to sweep through the rest of my team, then that can seem very dishonest, because I have to constantly be second guessing whether you're going to pull the trigger. And so I have to play in a way that is just immediately disadvantageous, which goes back to this playstyle that's not very fun to play, because I have to account for your ability to get me at any given point, and you get to choose when that happens. Next up is Mew, specifically Cosmic Power Mew. Cosmic Power Mew is one of those sets that either you have something for it or you don't, right? Not only do you have stored power, but you have Body Press on this particular set. If you load up the Taunt variety, then maybe you just have a Dark type and then your opponent can beat you with Mew. And so it's not like Mew doesn't have ways that you can get past it, but this particular set is either, hey, you beat me or I beat you, and there's nothing more to it than that. Very cheesy. I think this is a very safe opinion to hold, that this particular Mew is super cheese, super dishonest play. But hey, it's not broken, so it's allowed, and I think that's fine. I think it's fun to load up cheese on the ladder every now and again. But if people get mad at you for using it, you can't get too upset either, because you know what you did. Rillaboom is one of those mons that just clicks one move, right? Going back to this guy's post, your game plan revolves disproportionately around one facet of play. Rillaboom has a signature move, and it's not Grassy Glide. You forgot that, didn't you? Rillaboom actually has its own signature move, but you wouldn't know that because all it clicks is Grassy Glide. In fact, Rillaboom just is Grassy Glide move at this point. Nobody else uses Grassy Glide, it's only Rillaboom, despite many other Pokemon getting that move. But Rillaboom has built-in grassy terrain and Grassy Glide, and so that's all it clicks. And of course, it can click Knockoff, or Swords Dance, or Drain Punch, or even the rare Acrobatics, but generally it's going to be clicking Grassy Glide, because that's what it's there for. And that can seem really small brain, right? Oh look, I clicked Grassy Glide. That was really hard for you to do, and it's not like it's you're not going to get no damage off, right? Sap Sipper's not common, and really you just have Buzzwolf and Ferrothorn and maybe Skarmory or Corviknight. That's about it, right? Even Toxapex is going to struggle to switch into Rillaboom, especially if I decide to switch it up and hit you with Wood Hammer. Then you can't even switch into two Grassy Glides after that. So, very choosy playstyle. only just clicks one button the entire time. Next one up is Victini. Victini, in this particular gen, is a little less predictable, I feel, maybe than in Gen 7. Gen 7 gave us that Z Celebrate set, which was cheesy in its own way, but at least you knew that that was what it was going to run. In this gen, you never quite know if your opponent's going to be Scarfed, or Boots, or even Banded if it so desires. And Victini has such a wide variety of moves that it can seem really unfair while you try to suss out what your opponent has. Since Pokemon is a information game first and foremost, if you don't know what if you don't know what your opponent has to hit you with, then you have to play around with that and get information, which necessitates a more defensive playstyle. Of course, you can just play an offensive playstyle and pressure the Victini in return, but Victini has already such a fantastic speed tier that it's going to be quite difficult to do so, unless you have, really good mons that specifically counter Victini. Victini has V-Create, of course, which is just a very powerful click this button and win the game kind of move. I mean, that is literally the concept of Victini. It's the victory Pokemon, so I can't fault it too much on that. But it is somewhat cheap. Final Gambit is another one I think that is somewhat cheesy, right? You're going to lead off with Final Gambit. You're going to pick them on and say, well, okay, that Pokemon is now dead. Have fun trying to beat the rest of my team now that I've taken down your bulky wall that was supposed to wall Victini. Bolt Strike and Glaciate, of course, give Victini good coverage to round out his set. But I think the first two moves, specifically V-Create and Final Gambit, epitomize sort of that, I'm going to click a button, something's going to die, I didn't have to think about it mentality that makes Victini, in my opinion, somewhat dishonest. Although less dishonest maybe than some of the others on this list. Clefable, of course, has many sets, and all of them annoy people. But specifically this Wish Teleport set that was really popular. I don't know if I did this exactly right. I think this is what the set was running. This was really popular, especially in the post-home metagame, when we had banned Dracovish and the metagame ground down to a crawl. And you couldn't get off any chip damage on anything because Clefable could just heal everything up at any given time, and then it was just back to full. And it's like, well, there goes all my progress. It was not risky whatsoever. Actually, I think it ran heavy-duty boots, now that I think about it. Heavy-duty boots. And it didn't take any kind of real brain power to run Clef. Of course, Clef can also run other sets like Trick, Sticky Barb, and Moonblast in and of itself is one of those low-risk, high-reward moves because it's got a good chance to lowest attack. It's one of the strongest special attacks out there that has 100% accuracy, and Fairy type in general is quite spammable. And so Clefable just all around is one of those mons that I think is pretty dishonest, even though it is a staple of the metagame and can check a lot of different mons. If you use it on stall, you're running it with Unaware, which can be really frustrating. Magic Guard allows you to run Life Orb sets, which can or cannot be good at any given point in the metagame, but also allow you to just completely bypass any kind of hazard control, which means that you can switch in freely, not worry about anything. And of course, nowadays, hazards have been somewhat nerfed due to heavy-duty boots generally, but Clefable doesn't even need to have those, and it can run other items in that slot. And because it has so many different moves available to it, you never quite know what it's going to have, or even if you do, if your team can't shut it down, if it doesn't have taunt or some other ways to abuse the mons coming in to receive wishes, then Clefable can be really annoying. Some Clefables spam Thunder Wave. It seems like that at the end of every metagame. The Thunder Wave, Knockoff, Soft Boiled, Moonblast. Clefable always comes back. I feel like it did in Gen 6. In fact, Gen 6 was where it was really annoying because Thunder Wave was 100% accuracy. And then Gen 7, I feel like at the end there it was coming back. So it's only a matter of time before that set becomes viable in OU and prevalent. Reggio Lucky is another Pokemon that clicks one button, although in Reggio Lucky's case, it is actually just more one type, right? It spams an electric move. Whatever the electric move is going to be, if it's going to be Thunder Cage, Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, or even the weird Wild Charge, well, that's fine because I have my ground type. But Reggio Lucky at the same time is quite powerful if you don't have anything for it. And if you let your ground types get weakened or KO'd, all of a sudden Reggio Lucky is just going to go on a tear. And it only does one thing. So it's really cheesy in that regard, because it only can do one thing, so that's fine. But why'd you load it up, if you wanted to use a brain? And then the final one, of course, is our Shifu. And both our Shifus could go into this category. But really, they have one move that they want to click 95% of the time, right? Normally, our Shifu wants to click Wicked Blow, and that move was so low risk, high return that we had to ban our Shifu normal. And Rapid Strike, of course, has Searching Strike, which is also quite powerful, but at least is more abusable in singles, and so it gets to stick around. But at the same time, if my team doesn't have Fat Mons with Rocky Helmet, then it's very likely that a Shifu is going to sweep through me, and I can only blame myself for not loading up a good team. But at the same time, if I wanted to have a more fun team, then it's somewhat difficult to do so if Mons that have such powerful moves that they can easily spam are around. Anyway, let's now talk about the honest Mons, or Mons that I view as being honest. Right, these are the Lucinas, these are the pits of the Pokemon metagame. The first Mon on the team is Buzzwolf, and this is the one I'm least sure about, the least confident about. Buzzwolf can run moves like Toxic, but Toxic on a non-poison type does come with the caveat that it can miss, and oftentimes it'll miss crucial Pokemon, right? The Tornadus is going to come in on the Buzzwolf, and I want to get the Toxic off on it so I can chip it down over the course of the game, but then I miss it, and that was my one chance to get the Toxic off on the Tornadus for whatever reason. Well, now that means that I had to put in some level of risk, which I think makes it inherently more honest than it would be on a Toxapex or on a Salazzle, maybe. And Buzzwolf, besides that, doesn't really have very many cheeky moves. It mostly just has a very strong fighting move, and Ice Punch is covered, maybe Leech Life, and then Roost, or Earthquake. And it means you really can't complain too much about that. It's just going to hit you hard, has good defensive typing, and good defensive stats. So, make sure you have something on your team to deal with it, but it's not going to do anything that's too crazy. It doesn't even have Regenerator. Of course, Beast Boost can be a problem, but on Buzzwolf specifically, it's a lot less likely to see Buzzwolf ever get a Beast Boost, because usually it's doing walling, it's not usually doing killing. And so, I think Buzzwolf is a pretty honest Pokemon. Tapu Koko is pretty honest. It does have electric terrain, which can be difficult to deal with sometimes, and it can enable Hawlucha, which is a more dishonest Pokemon maybe. But on its own, Tapu Koko doesn't really have much going for it that makes it broken, right? It's got Taunt, it's got Screams, Defog, Roost. It's got a couple of good moves, but it's not even attacking you on its better attacking stat, right? It has to run Special, which is only base 95, as opposed to the 115 it could be attacking you off with its attack stat. If it had Play Rough and a good, not Wild Charge electric move on the physical side, then Tapu Koko would be way better. Unfortunately, it can't afford to run that because its special moves are good and its physical moves are trash. It doesn't even have Moonblast, it has to use Dazzling Gleam. Overall, I think Tapu Koko is a totally fair Pokemon and has a lot of good options, but doesn't have one move that it wants to click over and over, and it doesn't have anything that's too gimpy, right? It's not going to completely shut down Pokemon, and if it does shut you down with Taunt, for instance, then that means you're probably running a more passive playstyle. And I think that that's just the risk that you run when you run more passive playstyle. Bisharp is a no-nonsense Pokemon, right? It's got this one move set, and it never runs anything different, except for when it runs Bandit, it can afford to run a fighting move in the last slot over Sword Stance. And this is the only move set that Bisharp runs, and you know it's coming, so you can't complain when you get hit by one of those moves. The only part of Bisharp that might be considered less honest is the fact that you have to use Sucker Punch, which is a somewhat difficult playstyle to play with or around. But the one good part about Sucker Punch, which I think actually makes it quite balanced and fair, is that if your opponent calls you out, then you get hurt, because if you are a slower Pokemon with Sucker Punch, like Bisharp is, then they're going to outspeed you, they're going to kill you, and well, you lost that exchange. Or if you outplay them with your Sucker Punch, then they lose their Mon. And so it's more equivalent between the two, right? Hey, I kill you with Sucker Punch, or you kill me with your move. And that's all there is going to be to it. Of course, some Pokemon might struggle with that more or less, but I think Bisharp is pretty fair, especially since it doesn't have Pursuit. If it had Pursuit, maybe it wouldn't have made this list. Ninoking is a Pokemon that just does damage and has good coverage for all the Pokemon types out there, right? It's got Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, can even run Focus Punch, and it just is out here to do damage. It doesn't have a great speed tier, it doesn't have one move that it wants to spam more than any of the others, and I think that's pretty honest as far as you can get. Swampert is a nice defensive option. As opposed to some other defensive options, Swampert doesn't have the greatest bulk. It has maybe that's not fair. It has really good bulk, but you can only invest in maybe one stat or the other, so you have to choose. And although it has very good defensive typing, it isn't going to be immune to anything except for electric, and it can still get status by toxic, which I think is one of the big things, because then it can easily get worn down. It's going to get hit by all the hazards, and it only really can eat 1 or 2 hits before it will eventually go down. And so I think that, this is a pretty fair Pokemon to play around. It's pretty balanced. It doesn't rely on clicking Flip Turn or Earthquake all the time. Usually you don't get tons of points for clicking either one of those. It's just a pretty balanced Pokemon, to the point where it's not even technically in the LU tier. And finally, Ferrothorn. This is another Pokemon that maybe some of you would disagree is a fair or honest Pokemon, right? Ferrothorn can run moves like Thunder Wave, which can be pretty dishonest, and Leech Seed is somewhat of a cheeky move, but at the same time, Ferrothorn suffers from 4 move slot syndrome, and a lot of times, your opponent will have very good answers for Ferrothorn, and it won't get very much done. And so, if Ferrothorn is a core part of the metagame, then getting back to, this one here, Ferrothorn doesn't do anything that's uniquely meta or matchup defining, right? If your team doesn't have a fire or fighting type on it, if your team doesn't have something like Corviknight on it that can just sit there and not at all care about what Ferrothorn is going to do, then I don't know what your team is doing, right? Either you have an offensive team and you have a fire or fighting type, or maybe both, in which case Ferrothorn cannot deal with those. Your team may be more balanced oriented, in which case you have toxic types, you have Corviknight, you have Skarmory, you have Buzzwolf. All of these Pokemon can very easily deal with Ferrothorn. You can even have something like Slowbro or Glowking with Flamethrower, and that can also deal with Ferrothorn. So Ferrothorn is a very meta-safe Pokemon, because there's so many options that are currently in it to deal with it. So of course it has good defensive typing, it has good defensive stat, and it has a whole host of moves it can use to annoy you, but any good team should have 1, 2, maybe even 3 options for Ferrothorn. So, it'll prevent sweeps by certain cheeky offensive Pokemon that might otherwise run through a team, but it's not going to do anything too mind-blowing. Anyway, those are my thoughts on what makes an honest Pokemon or dishonest Pokemon. You may disagree with some mons on this list, or maybe you think certain ones should have been included in either of the lists. If you feel that way, please let me know in the comments, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, because I think that it's sort of fun to get on the ladder, load up a team, see your opponent's team and be like, I can't believe you'd run something like this, it's super cheesy. And that's sort of the fun of the game. So, looking forward to hearing from you guys, and I'll catch you next time.